My name is Miriam, 34 years old, and I just walked out of the courthouse in downtown Boston with my 5-year-old twin daughters, Emma and Grace. Their small hands gripped mine as we descended those cold stone steps, the custody papers in my bag declaring my ex-husband, Marcus the victor. The walk to the fertility clinic seemed endless where a court order demanded I destroy our frozen embryos. Everything I'd built had crumbled, but something in my daughter's innocent eyes kept me moving forward. Before we dive into how one phone call changed everything, let me know where you're watching from today. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of triumph over betrayal. 8 years ago, I was working as a paralegal at Brennan and Associates, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms. That's where I first saw Marcus walking through the marble lobby like he owned the world. At 26, I was amazed by his confidence, the way he commanded attention in every meeting. He was the rising star attorney everyone talked about, from an old money family with roots going back to the Mayflower. Our first conversation happened over spilled coffee in the break room. I was rushing to prepare documents for a deposition when I crashed right into him, sending his espresso all over his $1,000 suit. Instead of anger, he laughed, and that laugh made my heart skip. "Guess this means you owe me dinner," he said with a smile that could melt glaciers. The courtship was like something from a movie. Marcus took me to restaurants where the menus didn't have prices, weekend trips to his family's house in the Hamptons, surprise deliveries of roses to my tiny apartment in Quincy. My roommate Sarah warned me it seemed too fast, too perfect, but I was intoxicated by this world he was showing me. Meeting his parents should have been my first warning. His mother Eleanor looked at me like I was something she'd scrape off her shoe. "A paralegal," she said, the word dripping with disdain. How quaint. His father barely acknowledged my existence, speaking only to Marcus about cases and golf. But Marcus squeezed my hand under the table and whispered that they'd warm up to me. 6 months after that spilled coffee, Marcus proposed at the top of the Hub restaurant, the entire Boston skyline glittering below us. The ring was a 3-carat diamond that belonged to his grandmother. "You're everything I've been looking for," he said as he slipped it on my finger. The whole restaurant applauded, champagne appeared at every table, and I felt like Cinderella at the ball. Our wedding at his family's Martha's Vineyard estate was attended by 300 guests, most of whom I'd never met. My side of the church looked sparse, just my mother, my brother Tony, and a handful of friends from college. Marcus's side overflowed with Boston's elite judges, politicians, and old money aristocrats who whispered behind their hands when I walked past. During our honeymoon in Italy, morning sickness hit me hard in Venice. The test I took in our hotel bathroom showed 2 pink lines, and when the doctor confirmed twins, Marcus swept me up in his arms, spinning me around our suite overlooking the Grand Canal. "My sons," he kept saying, already so certain of their gender. Back in Boston, his parents surprised us with a townhouse on Beacon Hill, 4 stories of historic brick with a perfect nursery overlooking the common. I should have questioned why the deed was only in Marcus's name, but I was too overwhelmed by the fairy tale to see the cage being built around me. The pregnancy changed everything. Marcus became obsessed with my weight-making comments when I reached for seconds at dinner, buying me size-small maternity clothes that would motivate me. When I gained 40 pounds by month 6, he started eating dinner at his office, claiming big cases kept him late. His mother's visits became daily torture sessions. She'd run her finger along surfaces looking for dust, reorganize my kitchen cabinets, and constantly remind me how Marcus's ex-girlfriend, a surgeon's daughter, had remained so slim and elegant during her pregnancy. "But then breeding shows," she'd add with that cold smile. Marcus insisted I quit my job immediately. "No wife of mine needs to work," he declared, though I loved my position and had just been promoted. My protests fell on deaf ears. He'd already informed my boss I wouldn't be returning after maternity leave, humiliating me without my knowledge. The pregnancy became complicated at 30 weeks. Preeclampsia forced me onto bed rest alone in that big house while Marcus worked later and later. I'd lie there feeling the twins kick, wondering when the man who'd spun me around in Venice had disappeared. The baby shower his mother threw was filled with her friends' women who looked through me while discussing their vacation homes and their children's acceptance to Harvard. Emma and Grace arrived via emergency cesarean at 35 weeks. Marcus's first words when he saw them weren't about their health or beauty, but disappointment. "No sons," he asked the doctor, as if they could exchange them. When the nurse placed Emma in his arms, he held her awkwardly like she might break or stain his shirt. Those early months were a blur of exhaustion and isolation. Marcus refused to hire help, saying his mother had raised 3 children without assistance, conveniently forgetting the army of nannies she'd actually employed. When Emma developed asthma and needed breathing treatments every 4 hours, he complained about the noise disturbing his sleep and moved to the guest room. Grace was colicky, crying for hours each night. Marcus would storm out saying he had important meetings and couldn't function without rest. I'd pace the nursery with both babies, Emma wheezing, and Grace screaming, wondering how I'd become so alone in a house full of people's expectations. The criticism became constant. My hair was too messy, my clothes too frumpy, the house not clean enough, the babies too loud. He'd bring home designer outfits 2 sizes too small, leaving them on the bed with notes saying, "For when you get yourself together." His mother would visit and make cutting remarks about how some women let themselves go after children. I tried suggesting I return to work when the twins turned 1, desperate for adult conversation and my own identity back. Marcus's rage was terrifying. He threw my laptop against the wall, screaming that I was an ungrateful wife who didn't appreciate the life he'd given me. That night I sat in the nursery holding my sleeping daughters, knowing something fundamental had broken, but not yet understanding I needed to run. Life settled into a routine of loneliness and criticism. Marcus left for the office by 6 each morning, returning after the twins were asleep. Weekends meant golf with clients, or sailing with his father, always activities that somehow couldn't include crying babies. I existed in a world of sippy cups and doctor's appointments, completely cut off from the person I used to be. My family tried reaching out, but Marcus had slowly poisoned that well. He'd mentioned how my mother's apartment was too dirty for the twins to visit, how my brother Tony was a bad influence with his blue-collar job. When I'd suggest visiting them, he'd suddenly remember important plans or find reasons why it wasn't safe. Gradually, the calls stopped coming. Emma's asthma worsened that second winter, landing us in the emergency room twice. Marcus arrived both times in his suit, more concerned about missing meetings than our daughter's labored breathing. He'd pace the hallway on his phone, occasionally glancing in to ask when we could leave. The nurses exchanged looks I pretended not to see. Grace began showing signs of anxiety by age 3, crying whenever Marcus entered the room, hiding behind my legs when he'd reach for her. He blamed my coddling, saying I was raising weak children. The pediatrician suggested family therapy, but Marcus laughed at the idea. "We're not some dysfunctional family that airs problems to strangers," he declared. I'd started documenting things in a journal, hiding it behind old photo albums. The cruel comments, the nights he didn't come home, the way the twins flinched when he raised his voice. Looking back, some part of me knew I was building evidence, though I couldn't admit it to myself yet. The day everything shattered was a Tuesday in March. Emma had been up all night with a severe asthma attack, and the pediatrician wanted to see her immediately. I'd texted Marcus about the appointment, but he hadn't responded. Grace was at preschool, and I decided to come home quickly after the doctor to grab Emma's forgotten inhaler before picking her up. I carried Emma up our front steps, her little body exhausted from struggling to breathe all night. The house was quiet, Marcus's car in the driveway when it should have been at the office. I climbed the stairs, Emma dozing on my shoulder, and pushed open our bedroom door. Marcus was in our bed with Rachel, his 25-year-old legal assistant. Not just in bed, but actively engaged in a way that made their relationship's nature crystal clear. Rachel saw me first, and instead of shame or scrambling to cover herself, she smirked. Actually smirked like she'd won some prize I didn't know we were competing for. Marcus turned slowly, no panic in his movements. "You're supposed to be at the doctor," he said, as if I was the one in the wrong place. Emma stirred on my shoulder, and I backed out quickly, not wanting her to see, though she was too young to understand. I waited in the living room, Emma playing with blocks on the floor, her breathing still labored. 20 minutes later, Marcus came down fully dressed, Rachel following behind him, like this was completely normal. She walked past me, her perfume overwhelming, and had the audacity to pat Emma's head. "Cute kid," she said, then walked out our front door. Marcus poured himself scotch, though it was barely noon. "I want a divorce," he announced as casually as if he was stating the weather. "This hasn't been working for a long time, and we both know it." I found my voice, though it shook. "How long has this been going on?" He laughed, actually laughed. "Does it matter? Look at yourself, Miriam. You've let yourself go completely. You're not the woman I married. Rachel understands the demands of my career, the importance of image. She's an asset, not a liability." The cruelty of it stole my breath more than any asthma attack ever could. 4 years of raising his children, of sacrificing my career, of enduring his family's contempt, reduced to being called a liability. "You need to leave tonight," he said, finishing his drink. "Take the twins to your mother's or wherever. I'll have my lawyer send papers. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. This is my home too. The twins need stability. His expression turned cold, colder than his mother's ever was. "The house is in my name, remember? And if you want to fight me on this, I'll make sure you never see those girls again. I have the best lawyers in Boston, and you have nothing. No job, no money of your own, nothing. Be smart for once, Miriam." Emma started coughing, that harsh barking sound that meant she needed her nebulizer. I gathered her up, grabbed what I could fit in 2 suitcases, and left the only home my daughters had known. Rachel's car was still parked down the street, waiting to take my place before I'd even gone. The motel in Revere was all I could afford on the emergency credit card Marcus hadn't canceled yet. $29 a night for a room that smelled like cigarettes and despair. Emma and Grace shared one bed while I sat in a chair watching them sleep and trying to figure out how I'd gotten here. I called my mother at midnight, sobbing too hard to speak clearly. She drove over immediately, took one look at the situation, and packed us all into her 10-year-old Honda. "You're coming home," she said, and I didn't have the strength to argue. Her apartment in Dorchester was exactly as I remembered, small but clean, filled with photos of better times. She gave the twins her bed, setting up an air mattress for me in the living room. "We'll figure this out," she kept saying, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The divorce papers arrived 3 days later, served at my mother's door by a process server who looked apologetic. The accusations were devastating. According to Marcus's filing, I was an unfit mother suffering from postpartum depression I'd never treated. I'd alienated the children from their father, neglected their medical needs, and created an unstable environment. Every normal moment of motherhood had been twisted into evidence against me. The time Emma's inhaler ran out on a weekend became medical neglect. The month I'd struggled to lose baby weight became severe depression with self-care deficit. Grace's anxiety around him became parental alienation syndrome. Finding a lawyer was humiliating. Every decent attorney knew Marcus or his firm, and they wouldn't touch the case. I finally found Patricia Chen, a family lawyer in her 60s who worked out of a strip mall office. She looked at the papers and shook her head. "He's been planning this for months, maybe longer. This documentation goes back 2 years. The retainer cleaned out my mother's savings, $3,000 she'd scraped together for retirement. I promised to pay her back, though we both knew that was unlikely. Patricia was blunt about our chances. He has money connections and a head start. We're playing defense from behind." Marcus's parents hired the city's most ruthless family law firm, Whitman & Associates. Their lead attorney, James Whitman himself, had never lost a custody case. He arrived at our first hearing with 3 assistants and boxes of evidence I'd never seen. They'd hired a private investigator who'd been following me for 6 months before the divorce. There were photos of me at the playground looking exhausted, interpreted as disengaged parenting. Pictures of me buying wine at the grocery store spun as concerning alcohol use. Even a shot of me crying in my car after a pediatrician appointment labeled as emotional instability. The guardian ad litem, assigned to evaluate our family, was a friend of Eleanor's from the country club, though she didn't disclose this until much later. She spent 3 hours at Marcus's perfectly staged home, where he'd hired a nanny to make everything run smoothly. She spent 30 minutes at my mother's apartment noting the cramped conditions and lack of appropriate space. The custody trial began on a humid Monday in September, 6 months after I'd found Marcus with Rachel. I'd been working nights at a 24-hour diner in Mattapan, the only job I could find that let me be with the twins during the day. Marcus's team made sure the judge knew about this inappropriate employment that exposed me to unsavory elements. Patricia did her best, but we were outgunned at every turn. Marcus appeared in court like a catalog model for successful fathers' designer suits and concerned expressions perfectly timed. He spoke about wanting what's best for Emma and Grace, his voice catching with practiced emotion when describing how much he missed them. His mother testified about her concerns for the girls' well-being, how she'd observed my deteriorating mental state over the years. She produced receipts for toys and clothes she'd bought, evidence of her involvement as a stable maternal figure. The fact that she'd never once babysat or shown genuine affection for the twins wasn't mentioned. Rachel appeared as a character witness, describing Marcus as a devoted father who spoke constantly about his daughters. She wore a conservative suit, her hair pulled back, looking nothing like the woman who'd smirked at me from my marriage bed. She mentioned their plans to marry after the divorce, providing a stable 2-parent household. My witnesses were few and terrified. My former colleague from the law firm, Jennifer, was scheduled to testify about my competence and dedication. She called the night before, crying, saying she'd been told her job would disappear if she appeared. The pediatrician who'd treated Emma refused to get involved in domestic matters, despite having seen Marcus's disinterest firsthand. Only my mother and Tony testified for me. Marcus's lawyer tore them apart. My mother's bankruptcy from medical bills 5 years prior showed financial instability. Tony's DUI from college, 15 years old, demonstrated our family's pattern of poor judgment. Every struggling moment of working-class life became evidence of unfitness. The worst day was when they brought in their expert witness, a child psychologist who'd never met my children but had reviewed the evidence. He testified about the damage of chaotic environments and the importance of socioeconomic stability for childhood development. He actually said that growing up in Beacon Hill versus Dorchester could impact the twins' future prospects. I took the stand on day 3, Patricia guiding me through my version of events. I spoke about the isolation, the control, the emotional abandonment. But on cross-examination, Whitman destroyed me. He had emails I'd sent to friends expressing exhaustion with motherhood, twisted into admissions of inability to cope. He had the journal I'd hidden, which Marcus had found and photographed, selecting entries out of context to paint me as unstable. "Isn't it true you wrote," and I quote, "Some days I fantasize about disappearing?" Whitman asked, reading from my journal. I was expressing normal feelings of being overwhelmed. I tried to explain. "Normal mothers don't fantasize about abandoning their children," he responded, and I saw several people in the gallery nod. Emma's asthma became central to their case. They produced records showing emergency room visits, painting them as preventable if I'd been more attentive. The fact that Marcus had never once administered her medications or attended a pulmonology appointment was irrelevant. He was working to provide. I was home to caretake. The supervised visitation recommendation came from the guardian ad litem. She testified that the twins showed concerning attachment to me and needed to develop independence. She recommended primary custody to Marcus with supervised visits for me initially to ensure appropriate boundaries. I sobbed openly when she said this, which only seemed to prove their points about emotional instability. Marcus's financial disclosure was a joke, hiding millions in offshore accounts I'd later learn about. But at the time, his lawyer presented him as generous, offering me supervised visitation and even willing to pay for the supervisor. The judge praised his magnanimity while I sat there knowing I'd need that money just to see my own children. The final hearing was on a Friday. The judge, Harold Morrison, was 6 months from retirement, old Boston money like Marcus's family. He delivered his decision with the detached tone of someone ordering lunch. Primary physical and legal custody to Marcus. Supervised visitation for me Wednesdays and alternate weekends with a court-approved supervisor at my expense. Child support waived due to my limited income potential. The worst part was about the frozen embryos. During our struggle to conceive, we'd gone through IVF, resulting in the twins and 3 remaining frozen embryos. Marcus demanded they be destroyed as part of the divorce settlement, calling them marital property to be disposed of. The judge agreed, ordering me to sign destruction paperwork within 30 days. Patricia tried to comfort me as I hyperventilated in the courthouse bathroom. "We can appeal," she said, but we both knew I couldn't afford it. Marcus had won everything just as he'd promised he would. I had one last week with my daughters before the new custody arrangement began. We spent it at my mother's apartment reading stories, having tea parties pretending everything was normal, while my heart shattered with each bedtime story. Grace kept asking when we were going home, and Emma needed her nebulizer more frequently, sensing the stress. The handover was scheduled for Friday at 5 o'clock at the police station, a neutral location the court had designated. Marcus arrived in his BMW with Rachel in the passenger seat, already playing stepmother. The twins clung to me, Emma wheezing and Grace crying. The supervisor, a cold woman named Mrs. Patterson, physically pulled them from my arms. "Mommy will see you soon," I lied, not knowing when I'd have money for the supervisor again. Marcus loaded them into his car, Rachel adjusting their car seats like she'd done it 1,000 times. As they drove away, Emma's small hand pressed against the back window, waving until they turned the corner. I stood in that police station parking lot until darkness fell empty in ways I didn't know a person could be. The walk from the courthouse to the fertility clinic 12 blocks away felt like a funeral march. Emma and Grace held my hands, their 5-year-old legs struggling to keep pace with my desperate stride. We'd just left the final hearing where Judge Morrison had reaffirmed Marcus's custody and ordered the immediate destruction of our remaining embryos. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Emma asked, her inhaler bulge visible in my pocket where I always kept it close. "I'm just sad, sweetheart." I managed, squeezing her tiny fingers. Grace, always the intuitive one, pressed closer to my side. "Is it because of Daddy and Rachel?" She'd started calling Marcus's girlfriend by name, a knife to my heart each time. The October air was crisp, leaves swirling around our feet as we passed the common where I used to push them on swings as toddlers. Every landmark held a memory of better times, or at least times when I'd believed things would get better. We stopped at Marino's coffee shop on Charles Street, a place I'd taken them since they were babies. Maria, the owner, looked up from the register and immediately saw something was wrong. Her face, usually bright with welcome, creased with concern. "Miriam, honey, what's happened?" She came around the counter, ignoring the line of customers. I couldn't speak, just shook my head while tears streamed down my face. Maria guided us to a corner booth, bringing hot chocolate for the twins without being asked. Her daughter Sophia emerged from the back to distract the girls with coloring books. "Take your time," Maria whispered, pressing a tissue into my hand. I sat there watching my daughters color, their innocence still intact, despite everything crumbling around them. In 20 minutes, I was supposed to walk into Boston Fertility Center and sign papers to destroy 3 embryos, 3 potential siblings for these precious girls. Marcus's final cruelty eliminating any chance I'd have more children. My phone buzzed on the table, showing an unknown Washington, D.C. number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another collections call about medical bills I couldn't pay. But something made me answer, maybe just to delay the inevitable walk to the clinic. "Is this Miriam Thompson?" The voice was professional female with an undertone of urgency. "Yes," I said, stepping away from the table so the twins couldn't hear. "Mrs. Thompson, my name is Special Agent Sarah Castellano with the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak with you immediately regarding your ex-husband, Marcus Thompson." The words didn't compute at first. "FBI, what's this about?" "Ma'am, I can't discuss details over the phone, but Marcus Thompson is currently under federal investigation for embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. We believe you may have crucial information, and potentially you may be a victim yourself. Can you come to our Boston field office this afternoon? I looked at my daughters, then at the clock. The clinic appointment was in 15 minutes. I'm supposed to be somewhere. There's a court order. Mrs. Thompson, I'm aware of your family court situation. I can tell you that any orders from that proceeding may be impacted by our investigation. Please, this is extremely time-sensitive. Marcus Thompson's arrest is imminent. My legs nearly gave out. Arrest when? We're planning operations for Monday morning, but we need your cooperation first. You may be in danger, and frankly, you may have information you don't even realize is valuable. Can you come to One Center Plaza within the hour? I looked back at Emma and Grace peacefully coloring, while Maria's daughter made them laugh. I have my daughters with me. We have a family room with agents trained in childcare. They'll be safe and entertained while we talk. Mrs. Thompson, I know this is overwhelming, but your ex-husband has stolen approximately $20 million from elderly clients and charities. Some of these people lost everything. We need your help to stop him. $20 million. While I'd been working nights at a diner to afford groceries, he'd been stealing millions. We'll be there in 30 minutes. I hung up and returned to the table where Maria was sitting with the girls. I need to go somewhere important, I told her, my voice shaking. Something that might change everything. Maria gripped my hands. Whatever it is, you're stronger than you know. I've watched you fight for these babies every single day. We left the coffee shop, and instead of turning toward the fertility clinic, we headed to Government Center. The twins skipped alongside me, unaware that their lives were about to change again. Emma pointed at pigeons, Grace collected leaves, and I silently prayed that Agent Castellano was telling the truth about Marcus finally facing consequences. The FBI building's lobby was intimidating with its security scanners and stern-faced guards. But Agent Castellano met us immediately, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes behind steel-rimmed glasses. She escorted us to a bright room where two younger agents had set up games and snacks for the twins. They'll be perfectly safe here, she assured me. Then led me to a conference room where three other agents waited with boxes of documents. Mrs. Thompson. Agent Castellano began. What I'm about to show you may be disturbing, but we need your help to understand the full scope of Marcus's crimes. She opened the first folder, revealing bank statements with my name on accounts I'd never seen. Offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland accounts opened during our marriage, but hidden from me completely. The balances were staggering, millions of dollars flowing through accounts that technically belonged to both of us. He was using your identity to hide stolen funds, she explained. If we hadn't caught him, you would have been implicated when this collapsed. He was setting you up as the fall person. Another agent, a younger man named David Park, spread out photos of documents across the table. Do you recognize any of these signatures? I looked closer and gasped. They were my signatures, but on documents I'd never seen. Trust agreements, property transfers, corporate formations. He must have traced them, or I remembered all those papers he'd have me sign without reading, claiming they were for taxes or insurance. We believe the divorce was partially motivated by his need to distance himself from these accounts before our investigation closed in, Agent Castellano said. He knew we were looking at the firm. By divorcing you and gaining full custody, he could claim you were responsible if we found these accounts. My hands shook as the full scope of his betrayal became clear. Not only had he destroyed our marriage and taken our children, he'd been preparing to send me to prison for his crimes. There's more, Agent Park said gently. His parents are implicated too. Eleanor and Richard Thompson have been laundering money through their charitable foundations. The art auctions, the benefit galas, all of it was moving stolen money. I thought of Eleanor's contempt for me, how she'd called me low-class and unworthy. The whole time she'd been a common criminal in designer clothing. Agent Castellano pulled out a laptop. We've been investigating for 3 years, but we hit walls because Marcus is sophisticated. He knows how to hide assets, destroy documents, intimidate witnesses. But you lived with him. You might have seen things that seemed innocent at the time, but were actually evidence. For the next 3 hours, I answered questions, remembered details, provided dates. The late nights he'd claimed were for big cases were actually when he was moving money. The weekend trips with his father were meetings with offshore bankers. Even our honeymoon in Italy had been cover for opening Swiss accounts. "What about Rachel?" I asked, remembering her smirk. "Rachel Morrison is neck-deep in this," Agent Park confirmed. "She's been helping him destroy evidence and move funds. We're arresting her simultaneously with Marcus." Agent Castellano leaned forward. "Mrs. Thompson, we need you to do something difficult. The custody exchange is Sunday evening, correct?" I nodded. "We want to wire you for that exchange. Marcus might say something incriminating, especially if he thinks he's won everything. Would you be willing to wear a recording device?" The thought of seeing him made me physically ill, but then I thought of those elderly clients who'd lost everything of my daughters growing up thinking their father was a successful attorney instead of a thief. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'll do it." "There's something else," Agent Castellano said, pulling out another document. "We're filing emergency motions in family court. The custody decision was based on fraudulent information and perjured testimony. The Justice Department is requesting immediate emergency custody reversal based on criminal charges. Marcus won't just be arrested, he'll lose custody immediately." I started sobbing, then months of despair finally breaking. These agents, these strangers were doing what no one else had been willing to do, standing up to Marcus and his family's power. "We're also freezing all assets Monday morning," Agent Park added. "Every account property investment. His parents, too. The beach house, the Beacon Hill property, all of it will be seized as proceeds of criminal enterprise." Agent Castellano handed me a card with her direct number. "You're under federal protection now. If Marcus or his family contact you, threaten you, or make you uncomfortable in any way, call immediately. We have agents who will be monitoring your safety until the arrests." I gathered Emma and Grace from the playroom, where they'd been happily building with blocks oblivious to how their world was shifting. As we left the federal building, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. That Sunday evening, I stood in the police station parking lot, wearing a wire under my sweater, waiting for Marcus to arrive for the custody exchange. Agent Castellano sat in an unmarked van across the street, listening to every word. Marcus pulled up in his BMW Rachel in her usual spot. He looked irritated at having to do the exchange himself instead of sending his nanny. The girls ran to me and I held them tight, knowing this might be the last time Marcus would have any power over us. "They've been asking for you all week," he said coldly. "You need to stop filling their heads with nonsense about missing them. They need to adjust to their new reality." "Their reality is about to change," I said quietly, the wire recording everything. He laughed. "Still delusional, I see. Did you sign the embryo destruction papers?" "Not yet. The court gave you 30 days. Don't make me file contempt charges, too. Haven't you been humiliated enough?" Rachel leaned out the window. "Just sign them, Miriam. It's not like you'll ever afford more children anyway." Marcus smirked. "Besides, after what I've put in place, you'll be lucky to keep seeing these two. My lawyer has some interesting new evidence about your mental state. Amazing what people will say when properly motivated." He was confessing to witness intimidation, and the FBI was recording every word. "Enjoy your last supervised visit," he added, loading the girls into the car. "It might be your last for a while." As they drove away, Agent Castellano's voice came through my earpiece. "Perfect. We got everything we need." Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the storm about to break over Boston's legal community. I sat in my mother's living room, Agent Castellano beside me, watching the clock tick toward 9. Across the city, FBI teams were positioned at Marcus's law firm, his Beacon Hill home, Rachel's apartment, and his parents' estate in Wellesley. "It's time," Agent Castellano said, receiving confirmation through her earpiece. At exactly 9:15, Marcus was in the partners' meeting at Brennan and Associates, presenting a case to the senior board. 20 FBI agents entered the conference room, badges visible, weapons holstered but obvious. According to the agent monitoring the scene, Marcus's face went from confusion to rage to fear in seconds. They cuffed him in front of every partner, associate, and assistant in the firm. James Whitman, the same attorney who destroyed me in family court, sat speechless as they read Marcus his rights. The charges were extensive: 43 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. Simultaneously, Rachel was arrested at her apartment. Agents found her attempting to destroy documents in her fireplace, adding obstruction of justice to her charges. She cried and blamed Marcus, claiming she was manipulated, but the agents had emails proving her enthusiastic participation. Richard Thompson was arrested on the golf course at his country club, pulled off the ninth hole in full view of Boston's elite. Eleanor was taken from her Wellesley mansion in her mourning robe, her perfect composure finally shattered as neighbors watched from their windows. By noon, it was the leading story on every Boston news outlet. Prominent attorney arrested in $20 million fraud scheme. The footage of Marcus being led out in handcuffs played on loop. My phone exploded with calls from everyone who'd doubted me, who'd chosen his side, who'd believed his lies. Patricia Chen. My divorce attorney called immediately. The emergency custody hearing is scheduled for 2 o'clock. The federal prosecutor will be there. Miriam, you're getting your girls back today. I couldn't breathe. After months of supervised visits, of begging for extra time, of watching another woman play mother to my children, they were coming home. The courthouse was chaos, reporters everywhere. The same hallways where I'd been humiliated now felt different as I walked in, with federal agents flanking me. Judge Morrison looked distinctly uncomfortable as we entered his courtroom, perhaps realizing how badly he'd failed in his duties. The federal prosecutor, a woman named Catherine Walsh, didn't mince words. She laid out Marcus's crimes, the evidence of perjury in the divorce proceedings, and the immediate danger to the children's well-being if they remained in his custody. "Your Honor," she stated, "Marcus Thompson is being held without bail as a flight risk. He faces 40 years in federal prison. His assets are frozen, his home is being searched as we speak, and his parents, who were listed as alternate guardians, are also under arrest. The children need to be returned to their mother immediately." Marcus's divorce attorney, the formidable James Whitman, stood up. "Your Honor, we need time to respond to these allegations." Judge Morrison cut him off. "Mr. Whitman, your client is in federal custody. He's forfeited any claim to these children through his criminal actions. I'm reversing my previous decision, effective immediately." He turned to me, and for the first time his eyes held something like remorse. "Mrs. Thompson, this court failed you and your daughters. Full legal and physical custody is restored to you immediately. Mr. Thompson will have no contact with the children until criminal proceedings are resolved, and then only under supervision, if at all." I sobbed as Patricia hugged me. We'd won, but more importantly, my girls were safe. The FBI helped coordinate picking up the twins from Marcus's house. It was surreal walking back into that Beacon Hill townhouse now, with federal agents cataloging evidence. Emma and Grace were confused, the nanny Marcus had hired, looking relieved as she packed their things. "Are we going to Grandma's?" Emma asked, clutching her inhaler. "We're going home," I told them. "Our real home." We couldn't stay in the Beacon Hill house, it would be seized as criminal proceeds. But that was fine. It had never felt like home anyway. My mother had cleaned her apartment, making space for all of us. It was cramped but filled with love, everything Marcus's mansion had never been. The news coverage exploded over the following days. Elderly clients came forward with devastating stories of lost retirement funds. Charities revealed massive shortfalls from Marcus's theft. The Boston Bar Association launched an investigation into how he'd hidden his crimes for so long. Rachel flipped immediately, providing evidence against Marcus in exchange for a lighter sentence. She revealed recordings she'd made of him discussing hiding assets, destroying documents, and his plan to frame me if caught. Her betrayal of him was as complete as his had been of me. Marcus's parents' charitable foundations were exposed as fronts for money laundering. Their society friends distanced themselves immediately. Eleanor's coveted position on museum boards evaporated overnight. The Martha's Vineyard estate, the Wellesley mansion, all of it was seized by federal marshals. 3 weeks after the arrests, I sat in a different courtroom for Marcus's bail hearing. He entered in an orange jumpsuit shackled at wrists and ankles. The man who'd worn $1,000 suits and looked at me with such contempt was diminished, hollow-eyed, his perfect facade finally shattered. His attorney argued for bail, claiming Marcus wasn't a flight risk. The federal judge laughed, actually laughed. Mr. Thompson had $20 million in offshore accounts and multiple false passports found in his home. He's the definition of a flight risk. Bail is denied. As they led him out, Marcus looked at me for the first time since his arrest. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen before: fear. He mouthed something that might have been, "I'm sorry," but I turned away. His apologies meant nothing now. The custody modification was finalized a month later. Marcus would have no contact until after his criminal trial, and then only supervised visits if he wasn't in federal prison. The embryo destruction order was reversed, leaving the decision entirely to me. The 3 potential lives he'd tried to eliminate were mine to protect. Emma's asthma improved dramatically once we settled into a routine at my mother's apartment. Without the constant stress, her attacks became rare. Grace's anxiety faded as she realized the angry man who'd scared her wasn't coming back. They started laughing again, really laughing, not the careful, quiet giggles they'd learned in his presence. I found a job at a small law firm in Quincy, one that valued my experience and understood my situation. The managing partner, an older woman named Janet, had been through her own ugly divorce decades earlier. She offered flexibility for the girls' appointments and school events, something I'd never have gotten at Marcus's prestigious firm. The federal case moved forward slowly but thoroughly. More victims came forward, more evidence surfaced. Marcus's scheme had been elaborate, using his position to access client trust funds, estate accounts, and charitable donations. He'd targeted the vulnerable elderly clients with no family oversight, small charities without sophisticated accounting. His trial was scheduled for the following year, but his attorney was already floating plea deals. 40 years was the maximum, but with cooperation, he might get 15 to 20. Still enough to miss most of the girls' childhoods, their graduations, maybe even their weddings. 6 months after that walk toward the fertility clinic, our lives had found a new rhythm. The cramped apartment in Dorchester that had felt like defeat now felt like sanctuary. Emma and Grace shared the bedroom while I took the couch, but we were together, safe and free from the suffocating control that had defined our existence. Marcus's federal trial had concluded with a guilty plea on all counts. 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release. The courtroom was packed with his victims, elderly people who trusted him with their life savings charities that had struggled to survive after his theft. When the judge read the sentence, someone actually applauded before being quieted by the bailiff. I was there representing not just myself but our daughters. The victim impact statement I'd read detailed not the financial crimes, but the emotional terrorism, the systematic destruction of a family while he enriched himself through others' suffering. The judge had listened intently, noting that Marcus's crimes extended far beyond mere theft. His parents received 2 years each, mostly suspended with heavy fines and community service. Eleanor and Richard Thompson, pillars of Boston society, were now convicted felons. Their remaining assets after victim restitution were minimal. Eleanor had to sell her jewelry collection, the pieces she'd flaunted while calling me unworthy. They moved to a small condo in Florida, their Boston legacy destroyed. Rachel got 18 months and immediately disappeared after her release, probably changing her name and starting over somewhere far from Boston. I hoped she'd learned something, but I doubted it. Some people are just drawn to power regardless of its source. The Beacon Hill townhouse sale provided partial restitution to victims. The Martha's Vineyard estate went to a tech executive who promised to donate it for charitable retreats. Every symbol of the Thompson family's status was systematically dismantled and redistributed to those they'd wronged. My job at Janet's firm had evolved into something more substantial. I'd started taking night classes to finish my law degree, something Marcus had prevented years ago. Janet mentored me, seeing potential that had been buried under years of criticism and control. The other attorneys welcomed me, sharing their own stories of starting over. Emma and Grace thrived in their new school in Quincy. It wasn't the elite private academy Marcus had enrolled them in, But the teachers actually cared about them as individuals, not just as extensions of their father's reputation. Emma joined the art club, discovering a talent for painting that had never been encouraged before. Grace found her voice in drama class, the anxious little girl blossoming into a confident performer. My mother became the grandmother she'd always wanted to be, no longer kept at distance by Marcus's contempt. She picked them up from school when I had class, taught them to cook her mother's recipes, told them stories about our family's real history, not the sanitized version Marcus had preferred. Tony, my brother, returned to our lives fully. He took the girls to Red Sox games, taught them to throw a baseball, showed them that men could be gentle and fun without anger lurking beneath. They called him Uncle Tony and fought over who got to sit next to him at Sunday dinners. The frozen embryos remained in storage, my choice entirely now. I'd met with counselors at the fertility clinic, the same one I'd been walking toward that day the FBI called. The irony wasn't lost on me that the place meant to be the site of ending possibilities had become a symbol of choices restored. After much consideration, I made the decision to donate them to a couple struggling with infertility. A teacher and a nurse from Worcester who'd spent their savings on failed treatments. They cried when we met, promising to tell any resulting children about the gift they'd received. It felt right, creating hope from what had been intended as destruction. I started a support group for women navigating high-conflict divorces with wealthy spouses. We met weekly in the basement of a Unitarian church, sharing stories, resources, and hope. Some were just beginning their battles, others were years into recovery. We called ourselves the Phoenix Group, rising from ashes. The group grew quickly, word spreading through whispered recommendations. Women who'd been isolated, gaslighted, and financially abused found community and practical support. We created resource lists for affordable attorneys, therapists who understood financial abuse, and strategies for documenting manipulation. One evening, a woman named Carla joined, clutching tissues and barely able to speak. Her husband was a surgeon at Mass General, and the pattern was achingly familiar. Hidden assets, custody threats, character assassination. The group surrounded her with understanding and actionable advice. 6 months later, she had primary custody, and he was under investigation for tax fraud. Speaking engagements followed, first at local women's shelters, then at legal conferences about financial abuse and divorce proceedings. I became an unexpected expert on something I'd never wanted to learn, but my experience could help others avoid or escape similar situations. A publisher approached me about writing a book, but I declined. The girls didn't need their childhood trauma documented for public consumption. Their story was theirs to tell someday if they chose. My role was to protect their privacy while rebuilding their security. Dating wasn't even a consideration yet. Trust had been shattered at such a fundamental level that the thought of romantic vulnerability felt impossible. Janet, my boss, occasionally mentioned her nephew, a shy accountant who loved kids, but I'd just smile and change the subject. Maybe someday, but not now. The girls visited Marcus once a month at the federal facility in Otisville, New York. It was a minimum security prison, as comfortable as incarceration gets, but still prison. He wore khaki uniforms instead of suits, ate cafeteria food instead of 4-star meals, and shared a room with another inmate instead of lounging in his Beacon Hill study. The visits were supervised by both prison staff and a social worker. He'd initially tried to maintain his authority, questioning my parenting decisions and criticizing their clothes or behavior. The social worker shut that down immediately, warning that visits would end if he couldn't respect boundaries. Gradually, something shifted in Marcus. Maybe it was the therapy required by his sentence, or maybe losing everything finally broke through his narcissism. He started asking the girls about their interests instead of lecturing them. He listened to Emma describe her paintings and Grace perform monologues from her school plays. During one visit, he actually apologized to them for being angry and scary. Not a complete acknowledgement of his abuse, but more accountability than I'd ever expected. The girls accepted it with the resilience children somehow possess, though Grace still flinched when he moved too quickly. I never went inside during these visits, waiting in the parking lot with a book and coffee. The social worker would debrief with me afterward, ensuring the girls were processing appropriately. They seemed to benefit from seeing him humanized, understanding that the monster of their early memories was now just a flawed man in a cage of his own making. My mother often asked if I'd forgiven him. The answer was complicated. I'd released the burning anger that had consumed me during the divorce and custody battle. That rage had served its purpose, fueling my fight for the girls, but holding on to it would only poison our new life. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, wasn't mine to give. He'd stolen from elderly people who'd trusted him with their security. He'd destroyed charitable organizations serving vulnerable populations. He'd tried to frame me for his crimes while taking our children. Some actions create consequences that apology can't erase. What I had found was peace. Not the false peace of denial or suppression, but the genuine peace of survival and growth. Every morning I woke up in my mother's living room to the sound of my daughters laughing over breakfast. Every evening I helped with homework without criticism or fear. Every weekend we chose our own adventures without asking permission or walking on eggshells. The investigation had revealed one final detail that still amazed me. Marcus had started planning the divorce 2 years before I found him with Rachel. Every cruel comment, every documented incident, every step toward isolation had been calculated. I'd been living in a chess game without knowing I was a piece being maneuvered toward checkmate. But he'd underestimated something crucial. He'd assumed I'd crumble without his money and position, that I'd accept whatever scraps he offered to avoid complete destruction. He'd never imagined I'd survive the supervised visits, the poverty, the humiliation. He certainly never imagined the FBI would call during my walk to that clinic. Maria from the coffee shop became one of my closest friends. She'd been through her own struggles building her business after her husband's death, left her with debt and 3 kids. She understood the fierce love that makes you work 18-hour days and cry in bathroom stalls where your children can't see. She hired Emma and Grace as assistant taste testers, on Saturdays paying them $5 each to try new pastries and give honest opinions. They took the job seriously, writing detailed reviews in sparkly notebooks. It was their first experience earning money through their own efforts, not handed down from wealth built on lies. The Phoenix Group expanded to 3 weekly meetings in different locations. We partnered with legal aid organizations to provide pro bono representation for women without resources. Janet's firm took on several cases with me, assisting as a paralegal while completing my law degree. 1 year after the arrests, I passed the bar exam. The swearing-in ceremony was small, just family and close friends, but it meant everything. Emma and Grace wore matching dresses and insisted on standing with me for photos. My mother cried, Tony whistled inappropriately loudly, and Janet presented me with my own office nameplate. My practice focused on family law, with an emphasis on financial abuse cases. I knew the signs others missed, the subtle control mechanisms that appeared reasonable on surface. I could spot hidden assets and patterns other attorneys overlooked. Most importantly, I believed women when they described experiences that seemed too calculated to be real. The first client who walked into my office reminded me of myself 5 years earlier. Well-dressed but tired, confused by how her executive husband had suddenly become a stranger, terrified of losing her children. I listened to her story, recognized every manipulation, and promised we'd fight with everything we had. We won that case and the next one and the one after that. Word spread that I was the attorney to see when David was becoming Goliath. I kept fees reasonable, often accepting payment plans, because I remembered counting quarters for gas money, while Marcus complained about the wine selection at charity galas. 3 years after that devastating custody loss, I stood in my own small law office in Quincy, looking out at the harbor where fishing boats bobbed in the morning sun. Emma and Grace, now 8 years old, were at school, thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible during those dark months of supervised visitation. The phone rang, a potential client referred by the Phoenix Group. Another woman discovering her successful husband's double life. Another family about to be shattered by greed disguised as love. I scheduled her consultation, knowing I'd hear echoes of my own story, but also knowing she'd leave with hope and a battle plan. Marcus had been in federal prison for 2.5 years. His latest letter to the girls sat on my desk requesting permission to attend Grace's upcoming school play via video call. The technology existed, the social workers supported it, and despite everything, he was still their father. I approved it with conditions and supervision. His letters had evolved from self-pity to something approaching genuine remorse. He wrote about the therapy programs, the financial restitution he was coordinating from prison, the letters of apology he'd sent to every victim. Whether it was authentic change or performed rehabilitation, only time would tell. Eleanor had written once a formal letter requesting permission to see her granddaughters. The woman who'd deemed me unworthy was now asking for my mercy. I'd thought about it for weeks before responding with strict conditions, supervised visits, only no gifts without approval, no discussions of the past, and any violation would result in permanent cessation. She agreed to everything. That first visit was surreal. Eleanor arrived at McDonald's, the designated meeting spot, looking older and smaller than I remembered. Designer clothes replaced by department store alternatives. Her signature pearls sold for victim restitution. She brought coloring books and crayons approved in advance and spent 2 hours just listening to the girls chatter about school. "Thank you," she said quietly, as we left the 2 words she'd never spoken to me during my entire marriage to her son. The financial crimes had a silver lining I'd never expected. The Victim Restitution Fund, managed by federal trustees, had performed exceptionally well. Marcus's hidden assets, once recovered, were more extensive than even the FBI had known. After all victims were compensated, there was a substantial education trust for Emma and Grace protected from any future claims. My law practice grew steadily. I hired 2 associates, both women who'd survived their own high-conflict divorces. We created a different kind of law firm, one where clients could bring their children if needed, where payment plans were normal, where tissues and tea were always available. The Phoenix Group became a registered nonprofit. We received grants from women's foundations and even some government funding. What started in a church basement now had its own space with childcare during meetings and legal clinics twice monthly. I was invited to testify before the state legislature about financial abuse in divorce proceedings. The committee listened as I detailed how wealthy spouses could weaponize the legal system hiding assets, while claiming poverty funding, endless litigation, while their victims relied on overworked legal aid attorneys. A bill passed 6 months later, requiring enhanced financial disclosure in high-asset divorces and penalties for hidden assets discovered post-judgment. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. They called it Miriam's Law in the press, though officially it had a more formal name. Emma discovered she had Marcus's intelligence but not his cruelty. She excelled academically, but also showed deep empathy, often giving her lunch money to classmates who forgot theirs. Her art evolved from childhood drawings to sophisticated watercolors landscapes that captured emotion in color. Grace found her power through performance, but not in the false way Marcus had performed success. She channeled emotions into characters, understanding perspectives different from her own. Her therapist said drama was helping her process the early trauma, giving it form, and then letting it go. They rarely asked about why Daddy was in prison anymore. We'd had age-appropriate conversations about choices and consequences, about how people who do bad things aren't necessarily bad people, just people who made terrible decisions. They understood he'd hurt others and had to face punishment, but they also knew they were allowed to love him anyway. My mother remained our anchor. She'd sacrificed her retirement savings for my legal fees, but the Victim Restitution Fund had repaid her with interest. She used it to take the vacation she'd always dreamed of, 2 weeks in Ireland, tracing our family roots. She brought back wool sweaters for the girls and stories of green hills that looked like home. Tony met someone, a kindergarten teacher named Patricia, who understood complicated families. She joined our Sunday dinners, fitting seamlessly into our chaos. When she mentioned she couldn't have children, I saw Grace climb into her lap and declare her Aunt Patty, and that was that. Dating remained off my radar completely. Friends tried setting me up, clients' brothers were suggested, but I felt no pull toward romantic entanglement. My therapist said I'd know when I was ready, that healing had its own timeline. For now, I was whole on my own, defined by my own achievements rather than anyone else's. The office holiday party that year was small but joyful. My associates, our shared assistant, the cleaning woman who'd become a friend, all gathered in our conference room with takeout Chinese and grocery store cake. Emma and Grace performed a dance they'd choreographed. We exchanged $5 Secret Santa gifts, and I realized this was what success actually looked like. A reporter called wanting to do a feature on the 5-year anniversary of Marcus's arrest. I declined, as I always did. Our story had been public enough during the trial. The girls deserved privacy as they grew the chance to define themselves beyond being the children of Boston's most notorious financial criminal. But I did agree to speak at a national conference on financial abuse, sharing strategies for identifying and documenting economic control in relationships. The room was filled with attorneys, social workers, and survivors. I spoke for an hour about recognizing the patterns, building evidence, and maintaining hope, even when the system seemed rigged. Afterward, a young woman approached me, tears streaming down her face. She was at the beginning of her journey, having just discovered her husband's deceptions. "Does it get better?" She asked the question I'd asked myself 1,000 times in those dark months. "Different," I told her honestly. "It gets different. Then slowly, beautifully, impossibly, it gets better." Looking back, that walk to the fertility clinic felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been 3 years. The woman who'd left that courthouse defeated and broken, holding her daughter's hands while walking toward one final humiliation, had been transformed by fire into someone unrecognizable. I thought about those frozen embryos, often wondering about the children they might have become. The couple who'd received them had successfully had twins, a boy and a girl they named Hope and Chance. They sent photos, occasionally chubby babies with bright eyes and endless possibility. It felt like cosmic justice that Marcus's attempt to destroy potential life had instead created it for people who'd cherish it. My office phone rang again, another referral, another woman discovering that Prince Charming was actually the villain. I scheduled her appointment, made notes about her situation, and prepared for another battle. This was my calling now, not despite what I'd survived, but because of it. The lesson, if there was just one, wasn't about forgiveness or moving on, or any of the platitudes well-meaning people offered. It was simpler and more complex than that. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for who you're meant to become. Sometimes walking toward what seems like your final defeat leads you directly to your ultimate victory. The teenage girl who'd fallen for Marcus's charm could never have imagined this life. The young mother drowning in isolation and criticism wouldn't have believed it possible. Even the woman sobbing in that courthouse bathroom as she lost her children couldn't have envisioned rising from those ashes. But here I stood in my own office with my own practice, raising my daughters with love instead of fear. The fairy tale I'd thought I was living with Marcus had been a nightmare disguised in designer clothing. The real fairy tale was this ordinary life built on truth struggle, transformed into strength and a happy ending that looked nothing like the stories promised, but everything like what we actually needed. Marcus would be released when the girls were in college, a changed man, or the same narcissist, only time would tell. His parents would likely pass away before seeing him free again. Rachel had disappeared entirely, hopefully learning from her choices. The victims had been made whole financially, though some scars never fully heal. Emma and Grace would grow up knowing their mother fought for them against impossible odds. They'd understand that love isn't control, that wealth isn't worth, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to give up. They'd know their own strength because they'd watched me find mine. The sun set over Quincy Harbor, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I locked my office, drove to my mother's apartment where laughter spilled from windows, and climbed the stairs to our small but perfect home. Emma met me at the door with a painting she'd finished. Grace pulled me to see her costume for the play, and my mother called us all to dinner she'd spent the afternoon preparing. This was victory. Not the courtroom vindication or the federal investigation, not Marcus in prison or his parents in disgrace. Victory was this moment, this life, these children growing up free from fear. Victory was walking toward that clinic thinking everything was ending and discovering it was actually beginning. What would you do if you lost everything, but found out your enemy's victory was built on crimes that would destroy them? Share your thoughts below. And if this story touched you, please like and subscribe for more stories of triumph over impossible odds. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember sometimes the path to freedom leads through the very destruction someone else planned for you.